The events unfold in a local cafe. The protagonist, Casey, was quietly eating while at a nearby table. A couple of young people were chatting in French about obscene things, thinking that no one understood them. However, Casey is just in the process of learning French. The main character's colleagues were actively discussing the boss. They wanted to set him up, but the guy intervened in the conversation and said that recently the boss's wife had a baby and he was at their dinner party, and the idea of setting fire to the house is not the best. Casey tried to join the company by asking a colleague about the magazine he was reading, but his co-workers, upon learning that he was the one checking their expenses, told him to get the hell out of there. In the evening, in the office, he decided to print out his colleague's magazine, since he was embarrassed to buy men's magazines himself. When Casey got home, he noticed his dog was out of food, so the hero decided to go to the store. On the way there, the local hooligans asked him if he had a gun. When he was returning home, the same hooligans attacked him, beat him, and took his wallet, after which he ended up in the hospital. This moment was caught on video surveillance cameras, after which it was shown on the news. After that incident, Casey was afraid to go outside at night, so the next time his dog ran out of food, he treated him to his own food. The next day he decided to go to a gun store and buy himself a gun for self-defense. On his way home, Casey heard some strange noises. It turned out there was a karate club in the building across the street from him where they were having classes. He watched for a while and finally decided it would be a great idea to learn self-defense and signed up for a free class. On the first day, he broke the first rule: no shoes on the tatami. When he got his uniform, he went into the locker room and one of the men helped him tie his first belt and explained the meaning of each color. At the first class, Casey met Kenneth and they practiced techniques together. At first, Casey was not very good at it, but Kenneth was good at explaining the techniques, and the main character realized that he had potential, and after the trial lesson he definitely decided that he wanted to do karate. When Sensei entered the data into the system, he had to answer the question of why he wanted to do it. One of the answers was self-defense and assault experience. But Casey concealed the real reason for doing karate and chose beauty and health. Casey got a call from the gun store saying that his gun was available for pickup, but Casey refused to give it up because he was now practicing karate. That day, Casey practiced the techniques in front of the mirror. At the next class, each student had to show what he had learned. Casey didn't put in the effort for nothing, because Sensei praised him. He really enjoyed learning all the techniques, and his mentor noticed that. In the evening, Casey listened to messages on his voicemail from his boss, who was worried about why he wasn't coming to work and asked him to come back soon or he would have to fire him, which he would really hate because he considered him his friend. On this day 7 years ago, their master was accidentally killed with a shot to the head. Sensei told me about it at an evening karate class, but that wasn't the only big event that day. That evening, Casey received his new yellow belt, and Sensei solemnly tied it for Casey in front of all the students. Casey decided to go back to work after all. It was no fun to be there, and he was counting down every second until he went home. When he got to the store, he took all the yellow products. Apparently, he was very impressed with getting a yellow belt. In the store's parking lot, some guy hit Casey's car with his door. At first, he tried to stand up for himself, saying he knew karate and had a yellow belt, and demanded money from the man to repair the car. But the man said he wouldn't pay for the repairs and that Casey didn't look like he knew karate at all. Casey didn't argue with him any further and went home in tears. In the next class, the students were given the task of breaking a board with their fists according to the color of their belts. But Casey could not do it. He could not break his yellow board and was given a white board. Frustrated, he came out of the locker room where Sensei was waiting for him. He told him that his punching lacked confidence in today's class and that Casey wasn't ready for the yellow belt after all. Casey agreed with Sensei's words, confirming that he didn't break a single board, but Sensei didn't like what he said. He said that he had to defend his yellow belt and that Casey would stay with it until he got the green belt, and so on. Sensei took his student to his office and asked him why he had come to the club after all. to which he did confess that he had been robbed at night and beaten up by several people. The teacher advised him to listen to metal to become as brutal as he was, and after saying that Casey was into France, advised him to stop being into all things French, for they were always weaklings, easy to surrender to, and to give his preference to Russia or Germany. And the main advice was for Casey to begin to feel like a man in all spheres of life. And next, Casey was invited to a night class where yellow belts were forbidden to attend, but an exception was made for him. But Casey didn't give his approval to this invitation, because the class was held at night. Sensei accepted his decision but informed him that he could come at any time. After that, Casey heeded all the advice, started listening to metal on his way to work, took a strong coffee without sugar or cream instead of orange juice and croissant at the cafe, and started learning German. And at work, he punched his boss in the neck and told him that he and his boss couldn't be friends. Then he went up to his co-workers and told them about the situation with the boss. The co-workers offered to let him hang out together, but there were only 3 chairs in the room. Then in a rude way he told one of them to make room. That same evening, Casey made the decision to go to a night class. As it turned out, Henry, his karate friend, had also come to a class that Sensei had not allowed him to attend. When Sensei saw him, he called him to help him demonstrate a technique where he dislocated his elbow joint, saying he couldn't take away his blue belt, but he could take away his arm, then added that Henry could no longer come to both night and day classes. It was obvious from Casey's eyes that the night classes differed from the day classes in their aggressiveness, but that didn't stop him. They started practicing, splitting into pairs and honing their moves. Casey was paired with Kenneth. He fought well and even threw a punch that left Kenneth missing a tooth. And the avid adversaries Zena and Thomas crossed the line and ended up beating him half to death. And that was the end of the night's class. After class, everyone usually rested on the tatami, but Sensei invited Casey to rest elsewhere because it was his first time. They went into the room where Al was supposed to give him a massage. Sensei felt that women didn't have such strong hands for massage, but it was better than self-massage. And it was not entirely happy with what he said. She thought the locker room was worse than the men's either. Casey questioned Anne about her karate experience, but she said he'd better keep quiet. He began to ask why she had beaten Thomas like that. He thought it was because Thomas had gotten his black belt before she had. She replied that she wanted to prove why she was there, and advised him not to hold back or he would become weak, and you can't be weak in the night class. One day Casey had the idea of making himself a yellow belt, as a sign that he had a yellow belt, so that he could feel confident not only in the dojo but also in everyday life, and not look strange, because the belt did not go with his normal clothes at all. But there was a special order, and since the minimum order was 50 pieces, Casey ordered the other 49 for all the club members, including the black one for Sensei. This idea really surprised Sensei and appealed to him. He asked Casey how much it cost, and he in turn replied that it was a gift from the academy, even though he had just recently been fired from his job. Hearing this, Sensei offered him a position as an accountant, but not on a permanent basis until he found a job, and Casey accepted. The job was to start tomorrow. At the end, Sensei added that he really liked the belt. During the night a call came in. It was Sensei. He asked Casey if he could identify the men who had beaten him back then, but the attackers that night were wearing motorcycle helmets. This whole situation made Sensei angry, so he decided to help the guy look for the villains. After finding information about them, he asked Casey to come right away. Casey went immediately, and Sensei assured him to trust him. They met outside a bar where a motorcycle was parked, apparently by one of the intruders. When the man who had beaten Casey, as Sensei thought, came out of the bar, Casey asked him not to do anything and not to retaliate, and Sensei slapped the guy in the face and told him to do as he was told and to get it through his head he wasn't helping him. Casey was helping himself. The plan was as follows. When the man who had beaten Casey went to the motorcycle parking lot, Casey was supposed to give him what he deserved, but things did not go according to plan. Because he was not going to the motorcycle, but to do his business. Casey decided to talk to him. The man was very drunk and fell down. Casey gave him a hand to get up and a second later punched him in the stomach, after which the alleged intruder passed out. At that time, Sensei ran up with a camera and told him not to touch the man lying there. Casey asked what the camera was for, and the sensei said, "For history, for the history of your growth," and left, reminding him that tomorrow was his first day at work as an accountant. Casey decided to check to see if the keys that had fallen out of the man's pocket were from the motorcycle. And surprisingly, they weren't from him at all, but from a nearby bike. Shocked, Casey fled the scene. When he ran home, he found his dog breathless. Casey rushed him to the vet's office. The vet came out to the guy with the news that his dog couldn't be saved. When he asked if the dog had died without pain, the vet said that his ribs were broken and his internal organs were badly damaged. As it turned out, the injuries had not been caused by a foot, but by a fist. And then it became clear who could have done it. Casey came to the karate class and started behaving inappropriately, breaking all the rules of conduct in the hall. At that moment, Anna was giving a lesson to the children. She could not understand what was going on. At that time, Sensei came in and started to accuse Casey of killing his dog, but Sensei denied it because he was with him that night. Sensei said that he saw Casey beat up an innocent man, and he supposedly knew that the man had nothing to do with the beating, but he took his revenge anyway. Casey started the fight with his sensei, but he threw him to the floor and told him that what happened to him a few months ago was the best thing that ever happened to him and that karate helped him change. Sensei offered him a full-time job, and now he'll be coaching a group of kids. After the evening class, Sensei called Casey and a couple of other students, asked his head size, threw him a bag, and told him to get dressed and go to the garage where he would wait for them. When he got to the garage, he saw the motorcycles standing there and adjoined them. That night, Casey had to find someone who needed help. Casey refused to do it, so Anna took matters into her own hands. When the girl approached the stranger, it turned out that he had a gun. He confronted Anna, so Casey ran up to him and started beating him. After beating the man half to death, they all fled the scene together. As it turned out, the man Casey was beating up was dead. Sensei said they should have asked if the man had a gun. This time they screwed up. Sensei said that Casey would get a red stripe tomorrow and explained that it wasn't given to the teacher, but to the person who killed the person. Casey volunteered to give Anna a ride. On the way, Casey asked her how she got her red stripe. She told him that she had killed one of her students and that she had constantly succumbed to him during class. Thinking he was stronger than her, he attacked her in the locker room, and the girl responded by strangling him. As she drove up to the house, Anna said she hoped Casey would never come back to the dojo again. Casey noticed a van outside her house whose driver had recently dented his car. Casey didn't hesitate long to take out the rearview mirror and puncture the tire. When he returned home, there was a surprise, a new German Shepherd dog, and on the table, there was a noted gift from Sensei. At night, Casey broke into Sensei's office. In the office, he found a notebook with names written in it. Next to each name was a list of things that belonged to those people. Casey found himself on the list in a restaurant ticket given by his boss. There were other stolen items in the showbox as well. Casey promptly grabbed his keys from the shelf, leading him to a room with very suspicious items. There he found a tape with his name on it and decided to see what was on it. It turned out to be a tape of the attack on Casey. On the tape, Anna and the others were discussing the details of the attack on the guy. In the next tape he was on, Casey had broken into pieces. The next morning, Sensei found one of the students hanging from the belt Casey had given him. Sensei lowered him down and dragged him to the place where Casey had been at night. He sent him to the cremation table. By evening, Casey came into the hall and told Sensei directly that he wanted to kill him. He found out his real name was Leslie, and he wants revenge for everyone who ever studied under him. Casey challenged Lacey to a duel unarmed, and Lacey accepted the challenge. After changing his clothes, Lacey bowed to his opponent, and a moment later was killed by Casey with a shot to the head. Casey, standing in front of his dead body, told Sensei two things. First, Sensei always said that guns were for wimps, but Casey was alive and Sensei was dead, so now Lacey was weaker than him. And second, Casey didn't play by the rules, because there are no rules. Casey gathered everyone in the hall where he killed Sensei, saying that he killed him without using a weapon, piercing his forehead with his index finger, thus restoring the great master's honor, and said that if anyone did not like it, he would easily pierce his head, too. Then he asked everyone to stretch out their arms and noticed Thomas' arm was bandaged, so he asked what happened to him. He said he sprained his wrist playing a soft guitar, but Casey knew that was a lie because you can only sprain your wrist if you're playing metal. Casey called for his new dog and gave the command to attack Thomas. After the dog took him down, Casey handed the black belt to Anna. Casey took his place in rank, and Anna continued with the black belt students. And Casey himself became a coach for children. Our summary of the movie comes to an end here. Don't forget to subscribe on our channel. See you in the next video. Love you.